Hello, everyone. And as Isabella mentioned, feel free to ask any questions in the chat. I'll endeavour to address them throughout, but if not, I'll let you know and I'll save them to the end. It's just a sort of short summary, I guess, on how we address strength and power development at the Western Bulldogs. And look, I guess this is something that through our grad cert in strength and conditioning through VU, we expand on quite a lot more throughout that course if for those who are interested and are thinking going down that path in the future as well. And then just sort of a bit of a background on how we sort of address from the ground up. So I think first, our priority is making sure we've got athletes who can continue to develop throughout hopefully their long careers. And the foundation of that is making sure they move really well. So when they first come in, or we're first dealing with them, our big focus is on motor control or skill development, which you'll see at the bottom of the pyramid there. And that, particularly when we're talking strength and power, is teaching them or helping them be able to absorb, produce, and project force, and the different planes and movement patterns this can occur in. And then I guess the next layer on that is providing variability within all these different movement patterns, just to help create some stability and continuity under different sort of loads and situations. And then on top, I think the top of that pyramid is sort of what we're all after. And I guess once those two previous components are addressed, in particular, is that the overall strength qualities. So which I'll delve into a bit more deeply in a minute. But from a sort of a work capacity at the very bottom end, or as we may address within that work capacity, sort of a hypertrophy or muscle growth stimulus, through to a more sport specific and dynamic end of the continuum. You'll see here just how we address our periodisation through the pre-season period in particular, working from that work capacity end, which I mentioned, all the way through to a much more dynamic and explosive strength and later in pre-season and towards the in-season period, and the different components that we may focus on in those phases. So with that work capacity early in the off-season or pre-season, is it sort of base strength and hypertrophy, moving into the strength where we're focusing on more max strength, pure strength, and even some strength speed qualities, through to the speed strength and real reactive strength and ballistic type work, which could include things like plyometrics and more sport specific sort of strength qualities that I mentioned before. It's important to note that that these are priority areas within each phase only. So there may be 3 phases throughout pre-season. It could be 5 that you see there, depending on the length of time we've got as well. But it's purely what I guess the bias is, or the priority is in each phase, that we do want to focus on developing all qualities, or at the bare minimum maintaining all qualities at all phases or all times without the training year. And then so we split that sessions primarily into sort of a lower body and upper body sessions. So in pre-season, we often get 4 opportunities, maybe 5, to address sort of their strength, power, and speed qualities in the gym. So 2 primary lower body sessions and 2 primarily upper body sessions, and just a bit of a system to how we go about programming and planning those and the movement patterns involved. So there's obviously some prep exercise involved in both, some hip and glute activation in particular, and then some landing or force absorption type work to start with. And then we move into, in session 1, a velocity component, which will have a horizontal jump, something as simple as a broad jump, and at the far end could be some really dynamic bounding and hopping, and a run component with an acceleration, which we sort of work on some really aggressive angles using sleds and bands, which a lot of you are probably accustomed to or use quite a lot in your day-to-day practice. Then into the main strength component of the session, which one big bilateral lift per session we aim on, and then the rest is primarily a single leg and functional stimulus. So a squat in session one into a lunge pattern, and then a single leg hinge pattern as our main strength part of the session. And then the final component of the session is more resilience, work capacity, hypertrophy type focus, which bilateral hip thruster in session one into a single leg squat movement, and then a trunk movement and primarily an anti-rotation exercise. And then in session two, we'll work on more vertical stuff with our velocity component of the session. So vertical jump, whether turtle jumps or box jumps, depending on what phase of the training year and what we're trying to target in particular. And the run component will be more a high speed positional focus. So any sort of A position type drills that many of you, sorry, I clicked on there, that many of you may be used to doing, maybe functionally on field as well. And then a deadlift pull variation for the main bilateral lift into a step up and a lateral or frontal plane movement to round off the strength side of that session. And then the resilience and hypertrophy component is a unilateral, so single leg hip thrust variation, knee dominant eccentric hamstring movement, and then some sort of rotary power, so explosive rotational movement in there. Now these, we have various, I guess, variations of each movement that we use at different times of the training year, and a really good system to be able to regress or progress individuals and be able to individualize our program from there as well. But this really sets the base and the foundation of our lower body sessions. And as you notice there at the top as well in session 1 and 2, all right, session 1's a strength biased session, regardless of what component of the training year we're in, and session 2 will be more an explosive strength or dynamic session, again, regardless of what component of the training year we're at. And then we use Team Builder to program. So this is just how it looks for the end user or the player when they come in and are doing their program. So we use the software Team Builder, which we'll have up on our iPads throughout the room, and they can also access on their phones as well. And as I mentioned before, these are just more specific movements within those movement pattern streams that I presented in the previous slides for a specific phase of the training year in pre-season. So I won't go into each individual exercise. I'll sort of preface the movement patterns as I've just said, but there's a quick view, and we can address that again later if anyone wants to dive deeper into the nuts and bolts of those two sessions I've got there. And then into the upper body structure pre-season. It's a little bit simpler, I guess, in some ways, that, you know, again, your two prep exercises with some sort of rotator cuff work, and then a stability component in session 1 and a hang component in session 2, with a force and velocity component in both sessions. We sort of just flip the focus of each session. So in session 1, you'll notice we've got sort of a horizontal focus. That might, for a push, bench press is our most simplest option, obviously. Then a horizontal component, maybe a bench pull, or some form of row. And then, but we'll have both, as I mentioned there, a force and a velocity component. So a heavy strength movement, as well as some sort of explosive strength movement there, which the speed actually could be some sort of med ball throw, a Smith machine throw, and the strength component, as I mentioned, a bench press for the push. And then in session 2, we just flip that, and it's more a vertical focus. So overhead pressing, military pressing for your push component, overhead throws, and then the pull, the chin up is our most, I guess, our simplest version of that. Lat pulls, those sort of things, particularly in a work capacity phase. And then focusing on session 1 to start with here for our work capacity and hypertrophy work, we go into some single arm movements. We'll just flip the focus of what the heavy bilateral movements were. So in session 1, with the heavy bilateral movements being horizontal, we then go into some vertical single arm work for our first couple of accessory movements. And then our third and fourth, we'll go into some more volume work. So that F/S just reference the movement plane, so frontal, sagittal sort of planes. In session 1, we'll focus on more frontal plane movement. And then in session 2, that'll be a sagittal plane. And then our last movement in session 1, an anterior sort of transverse plane movement, typically like a dumbbell fly, is probably our simplest variation there. And then just to finish that off, session 2, we've got our horizontal single arm and single arm movements in push and pull. So things like a single arm dumbbell press, single arm cable press, and likewise with our pull movements. And that's how it might look from a programming point of view, with the specific movements involved. Again, with the speed components at the start, moving into some more strength-oriented stuff through the middle, and some extra volume down at the end. I think it's important to note, and quite often we get questions around separating the speed and strength components. That's not necessarily how it always works. I find this is, and same for the lower body program as well. It's a really good way to create some purpose and help create some context around what the player or the individual is doing, and some understanding in particular about what the end goals are. So, and help them execute as they should execute. So with that first component being the speed component of the session, understand that the exercise under that banner are meant to be explosive, and not necessarily highly fatiguing or super heavy at all. And likewise for the remaining components of the session. But we can and do play around with sort of things like potentiation complexes at times throughout the year, where we may have a heavy lift earlier in the session, supersetted with one of those more explosive strength or speed components of the session. Now, moving on to our in-season sort of periodization or model, and then I've termed this or titled it our weekly loading rather than, I guess, a periodization, because it stays reasonably stable week to week, and is more dictated on when we play week to week as well, and game to game. So we sort of we apply that same model we had pre-season into, I guess, a 7-day, Monday to Sunday, with post game being your day one. Say if we play Saturday, Sunday being day 1, and then if we play the following Saturday, that being day 7. Where we go early in the week is more a work capacity focus, which can be technical and range of motion, restoring movement and motor patterns throughout that phase. So again, working on, if I refer back to the first slide of the presentation, the base or the foundation of that pyramid. And that's sort of 2 to 3 days post-match, not wanting to sort of do anything too heavy or too explosive at that time in the week, when there's still a pretty heavy emphasis on recovery as well. And then as we progress through the middle of the week, and we're at least 3 days, if not 4, post-game, and still with some clear air leading into the following game, we can then focus more on their pure strength qualities, that particularly the max strength and strength speed side of things. And important to note as well, I've got there down the bottom sort of some reduced range of motion, and or some isometric holds, are good strategies to use at this time of year, where players are still potentially carrying some fatigue throughout the training week, but you can still get a pretty heavy stimulus or high force output without getting them inducing a lot more sort of peripheral fatigue throughout their muscles and their tissues, particularly when we're talking lower limb work. And looking to maintain at least 1 or 2 sets of heavy max top end strength work every couple of weeks. And then into the end of the week is when we've got more the focus on explosive strength, where hopefully we've sort of cleared all the fatigue residuals from the previous game, and we're able to be really intense and really dynamic on a regular basis, but it's quite low volume. So again, a lot of your ballistic plyometric work would fit at this time of the week, and any sort of run specific stuff too, dynamic run specific work. And apologies at the moment if I'm not addressing any questions or comments at the moment. So I think we might save that all to the end as I'm working through here. So how that looks from that model I showed earlier with our movement streams, and very, very similar. Movement patterns stay pretty consistent throughout the training year. The only thing that really changes is what I've got sort of circled in red there, is that without any dynamic work early in the week and in that session one, we will take a jump component out of there, and the run component is no longer really dynamic as well. Whereas in pre-season, we're happy doing some of that dynamic sled work or faster sled work, working on some of their acceleration-based stuff. At this time of the year, it's more position-based and more strength, pure strength-oriented as well. So it might be some more controlled sled pushes, some A position stuff as well with A marches and different sort of loading patterns along with that. And then in session two, we'll sort of alternate phase to phase, whether we focus on a vertical base jump or a horizontal base jump. And likewise with the run work, with a dynamic acceleration movement or a more upright high-speed run movement. And then the remainder of the session looks pretty similar from what I've presented with regards to the pre-season. Again, it's just the specifics within each movement pattern and what the movement looks like. That'll change throughout the year. And then again, into how that looks for the player or the end user. Session one, we sort of group that into some run and strength work early on. So as you see there, some sled marches into their heavy bilateral strength movement, into their single leg strength component of the session, and then with the resilience work at the end there, which includes their hamstring loading as well. And then session two, you'll notice there is quite dynamic with some run-based stuff, some bounding, and run-specific type strength work too, and loaded jumps as we get through into the speed strength component of the session. And then into upper body, similar to the early part of the programs or the sessions, slightly different from what they were pre-season as well. Without us wanting to do anything overly taxing from a neuromuscular standpoint early in the week, we sort of stay away from doing really heavy strength work early in the week. So we focus on some more stability components and some sub-maximal strength with both their push and pull components, and don't do any speed work as well. So things like some stability bench press movements with hanging kettlebells off the end of barbells, some offset bench press type movements, and some single arm movements get into the program early on as well in the session. And then the remainder of the session remains the same from what it was pre-season. Into session two, we just then flip that focus a bit, where we go into both their speed and heavy strength work, getting into that session. So again, your throws, heavy bench press, heavy pulls, those sort of movements, from both a vertical and horizontal standpoint, get in there. And that's how that might look throughout the session as well for the end user. So you'll notice in session one there, that stability component with the bench press, and even doing chin-ups on the rings, quite low volume, and just getting them to explore some different movements and movement patterns as well. And then in session 2, you've got all the dynamic stuff early on there, and their heavy strength stuff throughout the middle of the session. Now moving into those movement streams and progressions, I won't harp for too long or go into too much detail here, but it's just a bit of an example of what that system looks like as we're working throughout the training year. So I've got all movement patterns basically that I've had in those overviews there here, and what might get in at different phases of the training year. So with working through from the work capacity phase at the top through the reactive strength or really explosive strength stuff at the end. And then I've got the high speed run or vertical run position work in that first column up the top into the acceleration or horizontal base run position on the right hand side. So moving from some really controlled work, which we can do some happy doing quite a lot of volume with earlier on in the training year, to really dynamic work, as you'll see down the bottom there, specific things like high cycle runs, encouraging really quick turnover and getting off the ground really quick, focusing on some real high-end reactive strength work, and then some dynamic sled or banded acceleration type work at the, in the reactive strength or dynamic strength phases there. Into the jump down the bottom there, the vertical jump, some basic concentric jumps early on in the year. So even though it's a work capacity phase, we're still focusing on some of that velocity work, down into some really dynamic high hurdle jumps, repeat hurdle jumps, both double and single leg as we get further on. And then the horizontal work, again, some concentric only horizontal jumps for some broad jumps into some really dynamic repeat broad jumps, bounds and hops later on in the training year. There's some how the main lifts might work, and it's important to note here that we might start with things like a goblet or front squat in the work capacity phase, which I think are great for helping restore movement patterns in season as well, if we're quite early post game, but also in teaching some of these movement patterns. And then as we get down, I've got into dynamic hurdle jumps, which that more references what we may use as a potentiation complex or a superset with a heavy squat. So it's not saying that we don't have the squat in there at the reactive strength phase. It's just that then maybe a reduced focus or a reduced volume, and then the hurdle jumps and the dynamic components take a bit more of a front seat or a priority, if you like. And then into the deadlifts with either trap bar or barbell type work, into some clean pull and more in the strength speed and speed strength phases. And then progressing down the bottom there into a hip thrust type work. I've sort of got the hinge work, double leg hinge work, dulled there, if you like. And that's just more to reference that, if you remember in the models I showed you previously, that we don't sort of focus on a lot of the double leg hinge work. It gets more of a single leg focus. That's not to say we completely throw it out at all. And this is how we would go about integrating it at different times of the year. It's just marrying that up with everything else we've got in the program, and we find that we can get quite a high load and make it quite functional and really isolate our hinge work in a single leg pattern as opposed to a double leg pattern. And there's how that looks from our single leg lifts as well, moving from our lunge and step up patterns up the top to our hinge and lateral or frontal plane work down the bottom right there as well. And then our resilience work, again, it's important to notice that the short lever hip work is basically our hip thruster work, so unilateral hip thruster work. Our eccentric hamstring load, obviously the Nordics being the staple of that, but regressions or early phase stuff might include things like slide outs with little paddles or on slide boards into TRX type work with guys who haven't done them for a while or might not even have the strength capacity to be able to execute a Nordic. And then, referencing some of that isometric hamstring work, which gets into our program at different points throughout the training year. It's not necessarily a staple all year round. The focus being the knee dominant eccentric, which we've got there in the Nordic, and the RDL variations, which I've already referenced. Then down the bottom there, again, some adductor and calf loading, which aren't necessarily a staple in our program all year round. Might get into some of our injury prevention programs run by the physios more than anything. But they're more an individual and targeted approach with those sort of things, particularly our calf loading, which we find we get a lot of indirect calf work through all their sled work and jump work and reactive strength work as well. So we're conscious of overloading more than anything if we do too much isolated calf work year round. Into the upper body movement streams. In some ways, as I referenced earlier, this is a little bit more straightforward with a little bit less going on, particularly from the functional side of things, where a lot of run position-based stuff and dynamic work gets into the lower body sessions. With our push and pull horizontal on the left-hand side, and then push and pull vertical on the right-hand side. Basic, as many of you would be used to, all your bench press variations and bench pull or row variations, the horizontal components, into our overhead pressing and chin up or even lat pull type movements for our vertical pull. Unilateral or even power movements here, our horizontal push can, things as simple as a basic horizontal med ball throw, a lying med ball throw early on there, even in a work capacity phase, or alternate dumbbell pressing through to some really dynamic stuff, using ring power push-ups or using Kaiser machines if you've got them, to do some dynamic single arm press work. And likewise for our horizontal pull variations and our vertical variations as well. And then here's all the sort of, I guess, resilience, hypertrophy, additional extras we at the end of the session, which I guess aren't to be neglected as well from an injury prevention standpoint, particularly with these end range type work, with things like flies, and our frontal plane lateral shoulder work, from being a protective component on their shoulders as well, considering the incidence of shoulder injuries, particularly in a contact sport athlete. And then down the bottom there, I've got a lot of our trunk or core work. So sort of breaking that up into 4 separate areas, where there's an anti-extension component, where a lot of our plank variations get in early on, anti-rotation, pull-off holds, pull-off pressing, that sort of stuff. Our lateral flexion and resisting lateral flexion type work, so side plank being the simplest variation, overhead pull-off press work, but even some A position run type, some controlled A position run type work with offset loads or single side loads really work well there as well. And then into some rotary force and power type work, which sort of the world's your oyster there. There's so many variations you can, I've listed 5 there, a bit of a progression there, but I guess there's no limit to a lot of these as well. And that's the end of that presentation. So appreciate you listening to me waffle on for hopefully not too long. But if we've sort of got any questions now, feel free to put anything in the chat box, and I'll hope to address it. And Zoe and Isabella, if you think you've noticed anything that I may have missed throughout as well, please yell out. I'll just start to flick through and see if I can address a couple here. So, all right. Well, on their main lifts, what sort of reps and sets do they do? So again, that depends what the focus is and the part of the training year. In, I guess, a work capacity or a hypertrophy phase, we're sort of looking at to be anywhere between 6 to 12 reps for their main list. Like 12 would be unusual even for these guys. We'll get them, a lot of their volume will come in the latter half of the session. But for a younger developing athlete who needs the volume, that may fit. And it might be more down towards the 6 to 8 range for the bulk of the squad. Whereas in a max strength or really explosive strength phase, it might be, set like 2 to 5 reps per set, and up to sort of 5 sets at times throughout the year. So I hope that answers that. I'll just keep working through these. And do they do priming sessions? So my take on that is that you're referring to maybe a day before a game. And please, anyone, yell out if you see that or read that as different. But we do, so this in season, we will do a priming session, I guess, an upper body priming session the day before a game, and that's generally when they do their main upper body lift for the week. We feel they're really fresh, so they're able to execute that really well. As a result of them being really fresh, they can recover really quickly from that session as well. And obviously that added benefit, it is a bit of a neural primer for the following day that they're getting that high neural output. But when we're also not putting them at risk or stressing them, stressing their lower limb tissues as well. All right, what have we got next? How does the programming differ between your AFL and AFLW players? Well, I guess it's very similar. It's very similar throughout the year. That there isn't a lot of difference. They operate off a similar model, the AFLW players to our AFL players. I guess what we've noticed in the formative years of AFLW is we've probably got a lot more of in the developing athlete category. So they might do initially a bit more volume and a bit more of the foundational stuff early on, or there might be a greater percentage of the squad doing that sort of foundational work capacity stuff, hypertrophy work, and technical work to set them up for a career of being able to continually progress. There's a question there. I was wondering if we have access to the slides from today. I'll leave that in Isabella's hands, and feel free to jump in, Isabella, if need be.
Just on that, we will be doing a post webinar EDM that goes out to all of you, so you'll have access to the recording and the slides.
Great, thank you. Next one, what sort of recovery, sleep, downtime, etc. do you recommend? Great question. I think recovery-wise, the two big pillars we focus on are sleep and nutrition. Everything else is fantastic, but they're a much smaller percentage of the equation that keeps them resilient and being able to back their training up day after day. So sleep, I think it's there's a lot of data out there now and a lot of research that shows less than 7 hours sleep per night, and you're at a significantly greater risk of injury. And to be honest, 7 hours for an elite athlete, I would say, is an absolute bare minimum. We're sort of encouraging closer to the 9 mark, as we know they sort of all their physiological processes are restored much quicker with longer sleep and greater release in certain hormones throughout the sleep cycles throughout the night. And downtime, we do program generally speaking, most times throughout the training year, a couple of rest days per week where there's no training programmed to allow that restoration and recovery to happen. what are some of the staple dynamic stretching we do with them? I guess a lot of this comes into components on field, in particular in the warm ups, and also in the gym as well. But we get a lot of this done early in the day, and I guess it's endless in many ways. That some dynamic hip work, whether it's rotation work, whether it's flexion extension, even like things like you see the basic leg swings happen all the time. It seems quite funny, and that seems like it's more just habitual, and players like doing it. But a lot of that hip and trunk mobility stuff can't be underestimated, particularly, and then further up the train into some dynamic thoracic mobility. I think is really important. We know that can affect things further down the chain through the hips, and even further down the lower limbs as well. Ankle mobility, making sure they're resilient there as well and able to get good range of movement through their ankles, because again, when we talk about up and down the chain, that we notice that deficiencies there can cause issues up the chain, particularly when we are starting to load more or load heavier or faster. And sort of using hurdles as well as a lot to get the ankle, knees, hips, thoracic mobility, both under, through, over hurdles in different ways. We find it's a lot of good work into them, and even some of our movement patterns in the gym, some of our frontal plane work in the gym, lunge patterns, also double as a lot of dynamic stretching or mobility work. Recovery methods, sort of touched on that a bit. I guess as a side to sleep and nutrition, things like hot cold baths, saunas, water recovery by swimming pools, out in the ocean, those sort of things. Going for a walk, getting outside, light movement. All that stuff we sort of encourage to help promote recovery, particularly on the off days, where sometimes they can, the young guys can be prone to sitting around a fair bit if they don't have a lot to do. So any sort of light movement, something where they're getting some blood flow through their system. And it's an individual basis. Like we do encourage them to do what feels good for them and have an open conversation with us around what makes them feel good, and assessing themselves and trying different things and how they feel the day or 2 days post, implementing some of those different recovery methods. And so we can really individualize those sort of accessory recovery methods. What testing or monitoring do you use with players to assess power, and how does this inform your programming? So I guess first and foremost, most sessions we implement, we use GymAware, which for those who are unaware is a linear position transducer. And that gives us that basically the nuts and bolts of that is that it tracks bar speed, but can also indirectly assess power as well. So our focus is more on bar speed, session to session with that, and how we've sort of got through our testing with them, we sort of expect each individual to move certain loads at particular speeds at different times throughout the training week or training year. And that doubles as a monitoring tool as well, to see if someone's moving unexpectedly slow on a particular day, that could be indicative of them still being in a fatigue state. And then we can alter their program on the fly as well. So we're not creating a situation where we're overloading them in a position where their body's not ready to. Or likewise on the other side, they're moving really well. It might be indicative of a bit of an adaptive response, and that we may need to readdress what sort of zones or what we're prescribing for them from a loading point of view at any one time. We also use force plates quite extensively for a few different jumps: counter movement jump, squat jumps, or concentric only jump. and a reactive test with a basic drop jump from 30 centimetres. And they all help to give us a different profile on how guys express force, and when and where they are and aren't proficient in expressing force, and how we can then individualise their program from that. So the next one, you have deadlifts, hip thrusts and hinging movements in the main lift section. The general public, I generally see that those three types of movements grouped in the same program for AFL athletes. How does this help breaking up these movements into specific programs? So I guess the nuts and bolts of that is that we focus on say vertical pull with like the deadlift, the hip thrust. From what I see that as a real posterior chain glute developer, but also a horizontal force component. So we know that strength in that plane can really help with some of their dynamic acceleration work out in the field, and likewise with some of their hinge work. So I think it's important to have that throughout the training year, and I guess and the split between the two sessions is that we sort of have our deadlift on session 2, our primary hinge movement in contrast goes in session 1. More often than not throughout the year, and then we've got a hip thrust component in both sessions. So I hope that's addressed that question. If not, please feel free to shout out again. And I notice there's quite a few more messages coming through, a lot of nice comments, so thank you very much. But I am endeavouring to get through as many of these as I can. I know this is more of a nutrition question, but do you include any specific nutrition supplementation to support soft tissues? Absolutely, we do. Again, a very much an individual approach. We've got a fantastic dietitian who works very closely with our players, not only from an education standpoint across the group, but also for tailoring their nutrition and their diet first and foremost. And it's a diet first approach that we apply. And then if there are some basic supplements that we can think that we do think can help both a recovery or an adaptive standpoint, or even to help someone who does have a soft tissue injury, we will approach that. Preferred hydration supplements. I think something as simple as a hydrolyte is a fantastic one. There's obviously many out in the market now, but hydrolyte's a nice simple one that we sort of use year round. Again, there's another supplement question. I've kind of addressed that. It's much more an individual approach, and it depends on a diet first approach as well. We do like to promote, I guess, not promote a reliance on supplements. That what can you get through your diet to achieve your training outcomes and adaptive responses as well. Do you program massage, activation, sauna on rest days? Again, I'll sort of address that a little bit before in one of the earlier questions. It is, again, and I keep saying this, it's an individual approach. We have these conversations ongoing with each player around trying these different things and what works well for them. We program massage at the club throughout the training week, so it's a staple for every player on every sort of main day. Activation, obviously, activation type work gets in all parts of the program, both pre-on field, in the gym as well, and through part of our injury prevention programs, and likewise with the stretch component post on field sessions, and the rest of it is trying to figure out what works for each individual throughout the week. And absolutely, yoga could have a place in their mobility training. To Shelley, who's asked that, and again, along with a stretch component, and at the right time. Obviously, we don't want that sort of stuff happening immediately pre and on field session, because we do know there is potentially a force attenuation component that can that can come along with that, or a transient one at that. But it can impact what happens post those sort of sessions, particularly if they're getting to extreme end ranges with some sort of work. So yes, it absolutely does have a place at the right time of the day and of the training week. All right, working my way through a lot of comment. Here we go. If you have a lightweight under 19 squad, a 13-week preseason, 2 squad cuts, and a head coach that wants to gain weight, be fit and fast with no time allocated for strength testing, would you prioritise speed and cardiovascular fitness, or demand the strength testing so as to be sure to provide safe loading progressions? I think here it's this is a really common situation a lot of strength and conditioning coaches find themselves in. And I think trying to incorporate stuff into your on-field warm-up. So I think it can double as some both activation, mobility, but also some basic strength stuff that helps from a safe loading, but also an injury prevention standpoint. There's no reason why you can't be sort of body weight squatting, lunging, single leg squatting, doing some frontal plane movements, some run position based stuff, some basic acceleration movements, marching with some band resistance on field pre-session, or even immediately post-session if you've got time, if you want to load a little bit more. And from that point as well, teaching them how to jump and land safely, really important on field, both from a proprioception point of view, but getting them understanding how to produce attenuate force, but also how to project force, whether they're vertical, horizontally, or laterally as well. All right. Thank you, Laura, who's asked to come down to the Miranda Bombers. Bit of a shout out to them. I'm not sure where Miranda is, but good luck to them. I'm not sure I'll be able to get out there at this stage. Who else have we got just falling through here?
There's some questions, Des, in the Q&A box. Some examples of a quality rotator cuff movement or exercises.
Yeah, so thank you for that. We've rotator cuff movements. So think there's variations of overhead banded work, lateral dumbbell, sideline lateral dumbbell, rotator cuff exercises. Obviously with light weights, it's where we find like sort of little tubey bands or therabands attached to a pole, or even a squat rack, and then like even some cable face pull type stuff is fantastic for rotator cuff work, and even some basic push up type work is good for your rotator cuff. Taking one arm off, so you're sort of holding in a tripod position. Those sort of things are really great for your rotator cuff work. What do you recommend is best for the team to do for exercise on a rest day? I've sort of touched on a lot of that previously, but light aerobic work is fine and great to help promote recovery as well. So it might be walking, might be a light swim, could be a light bike ride, but nothing too intense that affects particularly if it's a programmed rest day. That's nothing that's too intense that's going to affect what's to come in the following days. It's meant to be more intense and has a lot more volume in it. Is post-match day a pure recovery day? Yes, is the simple answer. And again, that's sleep and nutrition are their big rocks, and the rest is much more individual focus. Ice bars, yes, come into that for a lot of players. Some contrast and some heat stuff may come in for others. Some light stretching also fits in there. What are your thoughts and benefits of heart rate zone training? yeah, I think there's huge benefits of it for the right individuals. Some people struggle to grasp the concept of it, and like some more vague terminology, whether it's things as simple as easy, light, hard, or easy, moderate, hard, those sort of things. But I think, and it depends what you're targeting as well. I think from endurance, if you're targeting sort of endurance qualities, I think absolutely worthwhile. If you're trying to make sure that you're not going too intense on certain days, it's absolutely got a lot of benefit, and making sure you don't end up with a lot of your training in the grey zone or the middle zone because you're taking your easy days too hard. I think it's that sort of internal feedback that you get from heart rate and heart rate zone training is fantastic. Can be difficult in contact sports. There are ways of doing it, and we do a little bit of it at the top level, but can be difficult at times with contact sports and getting really good, accurate heart rate data if you're trying to integrate that into a field sport session. I've seen a few come up in the chat. I'll just open that box again. Yeah, I think I've covered everything there, Isabella and Zoe, at this stage. Yeah, feel free to jump in if I've missed anything.
Yeah, thank you so much, Des. I think, all the questions were covered and answered very great. Zoe, did you want to jump in and talk about the course?
Yeah, of course. I'm so glad everyone enjoyed the webinar, and thank you, Des, for jumping on while you are in your off season. Des is part of our high performance team at the club and does have a lot to do with the delivery of the course, which is a graduate certificate in strength and conditioning. So we ran the course for the first time this year, and we had a great cohort come through, featuring some personal trainers and exercise professionals just like yourselves who are on the call. This webinar was basically a sample of one of our masterclasses that Des and other staff deliver during the course. So if you love the content here and want to learn more, I can definitely recommend learning more about the course. You can find more information at education.westernbulldogs.com.au. The Graduate Certificate in Strength and Conditioning is a postgraduate course, so it combines coursework which is delivered by Victoria University here in Melbourne, Footscray, and unparalleled access and experiences at the Western Bulldogs, learning all about high performance and sports insight across all of our 4 football teams. So that does include the AFL and VFL programs, as well as AFLW and VFLW. Our next enrolment for the course is beginning next year in 2024, February. So you do have some time to learn more and begin enrolment if it's something that is of interest to you. It's 1 semester, and we are really proud of the way that the program has come together. So out of the course, you'll get a postgraduate qualification, a pathway directly into a Master's of Sport and Exercise Science at Victoria University, if further study is something that you are interested in, invaluable industry understanding, learning from staff at the club like Des, and opportunities to strengthen your network and industry connections as well. So if you do want to learn more, feel free to visit the website that I mentioned earlier, or email myself at education@westernbulldogs.com.au. And happy to answer any questions now that I've seen come through. Prerequisites for the course. Yes, eligibility is done on a case-by-case basis. So given that it's a postgraduate level of course, there is some expectation that you'd have an undergraduate degree in exercise science or equivalent experience in the industry, whether that's through your work or any other qualifications that you have attained through your years in industry. The cost is all set by Victoria University and is very dependent on your situation. The course is eligible for fee help, which enables students to defer their program fees and more information can be found on either our website or the VU website. The course is delivered in person. Some of the classes are online, so you can do it remotely, but as you can appreciate, there is a large practical component which is taught by VU, as well as the experience at the club, whether it's shadow shifts in our football programs or learning from staff, that is undertaken in person. So feel free to get in touch if you do want any more information or check out the website. Thank you to AusActive and Isabella for putting on this webinar. And again, thank you to Des for sharing your insights, which, judging by the amount of questions, I think was very well received.
I definitely.
Thanks, Isabella, and thanks everyone for joining as well. And just to reiterate what Zoe has said, it was I guess the first year of the grad cert program this year, and I think us as a club and us as a high performance team, and even from the medical side, insight into rehab and stuff like that, we sort of benefited a lot by having the students come through, both for shadow shifts and for sort of masterclasses we ran, just helping to challenge us and question us as well. And you get, with the time in at the club, you do get really sort of unparalleled opportunities to do that, and the time and the conversations are as much as you get as much benefit out of, I think, as actually watching what the players are doing and what's happening from a training point of view.
Let's go!